Good morning, everyone. I'm very thankful that you all can join me. We left off yesterday in Exodus 9, where the hailstorm, hell mixed with fire, and all that total destruction had ceased. Moses prayed, the Lord stopped it, and Pharaoh's heart became hardened once again. We pick up now in Exodus 10. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I might show these my signs before him. So we see at first Pharaoh's heart's already hardened. You can read that in Exodus 5. Then we see in Exodus 7 how God hardens his heart. And then we see in Exodus 9 how now it's a constant back and forth. The Pharaoh's either hardening his own heart or God is hardening it for him. Either way, this Pharaoh is not a godly man. He's a very evil man. And that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and of thy son's son what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know how that I am the Lord. So we see how God is doing this for future generations as well, so that not only the people of Israel will know about it, but also for the other nations to know about it. 400 years later, in 1 Samuel, we'll be reading, And the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God is come into the camp. And they said, Woe unto us, for there hath not been such a thing heretofore. Woe unto us, who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. So word had gotten to all these nations 400 years later. These enemies of Israel still remembered what God had done in Israel, and we remember it thousands of years later. And Moses and Aaron came in unto Pharaoh and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, How long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. So God is asking Pharaoh, how long are you going to resist? Because remember, God can see into his heart. He looks past our words. And he sees right into the heart of this man. He knows that he's refusing him. I heard it said once, God sees hearts like we see faces. And so he can see the evil face of this Pharaoh inwardly. But he says, How long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? This is the persistent question that I believe God asks to mankind. A very similar question was asked to Saul of Tarsus before he became Paul on his ride to Damascus. And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me. This is Paul the Apostle speaking. I heard a voice speaking unto me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, his name was Saul at that time, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. Kicking against the pricks was referring to what they would put the yoke upon oxen, these farmers would, and they would have this little stick that they would prick them with. And sometimes I've heard it said that they would have like a pointy kind of object around that ear, kind of just something that if they kicked back, it would hit their hoof or something. I don't think many of them had that, though. That's not a very common thing. It's usually just this stick right here that is what he's talking about. How much longer are you going to kick against that? You and I would know it as a goad. A goad is a sharp pointed stick for urging on cattle, etc. The verse could easily be translated, Why do you kick against the goad? And it was just a sharp pointy stick that the farmer would use behind the ox or cow or whatever. But there are, I believe, two things that Jesus was meaning whenever he was asking that to Paul. I believe, of course, he was talking about Paul's unwillingness to surrender to God, which refers back to the Pharaoh, and go ahead and surrender to God. That way he can do his will. Because I believe that after Paul seen the stoning of Stephen, that did something to him. Because Stephen, he looked up and he seen Christ standing at the right hand of God. And now, whenever Paul is being asked that, he is also seeing the Lord, but he's blinded by it. But it's a similar experience for Paul as Stephen had. And I believe that after he seen Stephen get stoned, I believe that it was starting to work on him. Why in the world did this guy go unto his death? Paul was probably saying to himself, Saul was saying to himself, why did he go all the way to his death still believing in this man unless there was something to it? Very intelligent man Stephen was. He wasn't an idiot. But there's also another side to that. I believe Christ was also saying, why do you kick against the pricks? Meaning, why are you kicking against something that God is going to do anyway? Meaning, you're not going to stop the church. You're not going to hold my people back. You could kill them, and they'll just keep coming. Like, more and more people convert, the more martyrs that you make out of us. And the same experience is happening right here with Pharaoh. Thousands of years before that, we see how he's asking Pharaoh. He says, why are you kicking against the fate? Why are you kicking against destiny? My people will be let go. It doesn't matter what you're doing. He says, you better humble yourself now. And this Pharaoh doesn't want to. Else, if thou refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow will I bring the locust into thy coast. And they shall cover the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see the earth. And they shall eat the residue of that which is escaped, which remaineth unto you from the hail, and shall eat every tree which groweth for you out of the field. And they shall fill thy houses, and the houses of all thy servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither thy fathers nor thy fathers' fathers have seen since the day that they were upon the earth unto this day. And he turned himself and went out from Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's servants said unto him, how long shall this man be a snare unto us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed? Now remember, previously, these counselors of Pharaoh, his servants and such, their hearts became hardened, and they were in the same boat as Pharaoh. Now they're jumping boat, they're jumping ship, and they said, "No, why don't you just let them go?" They said, we're nothing now, we're destroyed. Anybody can come in. The Hebrews could probably have took them over almost at that at that time. Everything was annihilated. And Moses and Aaron were brought again unto Pharaoh, and he said unto them, go, serve the Lord your God, but who are they that shall go? See, now, we can see how whenever Pharaoh is doing God's will, whenever he is doing the good thing for his people with Joseph, how blessed Egypt was. Even at a time of great famine, Egypt was still able to eat and to be nourished, and they were fine. They had so much more than everyone else. People came to them for help. But now we see this Pharaoh. He's the exact opposite of that Pharaoh. And this Pharaoh, God had built up Egypt whenever Joseph was around. Now that Moses is around and this Pharaoh's heart's hardened, we see the complete other side. Now Egypt is destroyed. So God has the ability to uplift a nation or destroy it. And Moses said, we will go with our young and with our old, with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our herds will we go, for we must hold a feast unto the Lord. And he said unto them, let the Lord be so with you, as I will let you go, and your little ones. Look to it, for evil is before you. Not so, go now ye that are men, and serve the Lord, for that ye did desire, and they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. So he's telling them, only the men go. He says, I keep the children, I keep the women, you men can go. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail hath left. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locust. And the locust went up over the land of Egypt, and rested in all the coast of Egypt. Very grievous. Remember what we talked about yesterday. Anytime there's a great emphasis, pay great attention to it. And man, what a swarm. We'll get to that right here in just a second. Very grievous were they. Before them there were no such locusts as they, neither after them shall be such. This was the worst locust swarm the earth has and ever will see. Now, locust swarms are just absolutely mind-bogglingly. There's nothing that you can do. Nothing. They try now where they'll try to fly over the locust, and they'll spray these poisons upon them, trying to kill them. But it does nothing. It literally does nothing. Usually, by the time that the planes even get there, the locusts have already ate up everything. It only takes them just an hour or so, not long at all, to eat up an entire field. One can read in articles like this about the largest locust swarm ever recorded. In 1875, the largest locust swarm in history was recorded over the Midwest here in America. 198,000 square miles of a swarm. For a size reference, California covers 163,696 square miles. The 1875 swarm was estimated to contain several trillion locusts and probably weighed several million tons. Speaking on the devastation of what these locusts actually did, the locusts soon scoured the fields of crops, the trees of leaves, every blade of grass, the wool off sheep, the harnesses off horses, the paint off wagons, and the handles off pitchforks. The locust, farmers grimly quipped, ate everything but the mortgage. The article even says that these locusts blocked out the sun. The cloud was hailing grasshoppers. The cloud was grasshoppers. The cloud was hailing grasshoppers. The cloud was grasshoppers. Their bodies hid the sun and made darkness. Their thin, large wings gleamed and glittered. The rasping whirring of their wings filled the whole air, and they hit the ground and the house with the noise of a hailstorm. Within the short span of hours, locust swarms could blow in and devour everything a farmer had. Total consumption, crops, fabric, or clothing. So, back in 1875, America seen the largest locust swarm recorded. Not really. This was recorded, and it says that this one was the largest one ever. There would never be one such like it ever again. And the one in 1875 the swarm was bigger than California. That's biblical. That's God power right there. But this one was bigger than that. How absolutely catastrophic. You can't picture in your mind how bad that this was. Speaking of the locusts, for they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened, and they did eat every herb of the land, and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. And there remained not any green thing in the trees, or in the herbs of the field, through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste. Now he's, hurry up, go get them, go get them, go get them. I gotta. And he said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. So now we're seeing he's doing this a lot now. I've sinned, I'm sorry. Now therefore forgive, I pray thee, my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord, pray to God for me, that he may take away from me this death only. And he went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord turned a mighty strong west wind, which took away the locusts and cast them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the coast of Egypt. Kind of makes you wonder why this Pharaoh didn't call upon, or at least we're not told that he called upon their mighty god Osiris. Osiris is supposed to be that's one of the big shots in Egypt at that time. People still worship these gods too, by the way. We'll get to that here in a second. But Osiris was the resurrection god. He symbolized fertility and the Nile's regeneration. He is vegetation and the agriculture god. Now we see they have no vegetation. They have no agriculture. It's wiped away. And now we notice what God told Moses before he entered into Egypt. He said, you'll be like a god unto Pharaoh, and Aaron will be like your prophet. He didn't even say like a god. He says you'll be a god to him. And now we see how Pharaoh is begging for his forgiveness. He's not even, we're not even told that he calls upon Osiris or any of these other gods. He just go and get Moses and Aaron in haste. So he is, hurry up, hurry up. He wants to ask his forgiveness, you know. And he tells him, I have sinned. What do I do? He doesn't even pray to his God. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the children of Israel go. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. If you're thinking that all it did was get really, really dark in Egypt during this time, you have no clue. Out of all the prior plagues, I do believe that this one was the most harsh. You see, because this darkness is not Kashek in the old Hebrew, or at least in the Hebrew that we have, but it is not Kashek, it is Koshek in the Hebrew. Keshek merely means the absence of visible light. Koshek in Hebrew is darkness. It's a figurative word as well as physical. We're about to learn that. But figuratively, it means misery, destruction, death, sorrow, wickedness. This is an evil darkness which may be felt. Me and you, all we can do is see darkness. This is a darkness you could feel, and it was an evil. I believe that this is what Jesus talks about, outer darkness. Cast them into outer darkness. It's the complete absence of God's presence, I believe, because we know that the light still remained with the Israelites, but the darkness filled all of the Egyptians for 3 days. And it says that they couldn't see one another, but I believe that this is like a realm where demons are free to run. Demons have free reign in this realm. God's protection, God's mercy, the hope of God, all of that is stripped away whenever this darkness comes upon the earth. Remember how Christ, whenever he died upon the cross, how the darkness came down for hours upon the earth. I believe this is the pinnacle. This is the peak of whenever God gets the most angry. And this would have been a terrifying darkness because not even a candle was allowed to be lit. You couldn't light a candle. It's like this darkness doesn't give you any kind of options. All that you do, you're just there and scared and you're in terror. You are literally helpless. At least with the hailstorms and the locusts, you can run, you can hide, you still see things, you still have abilities that you can do, you have options. In this darkness, you have no options. None whatsoever. Only terror, only misery, only sorrow, only destruction, only wickedness dwells in this darkness. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. You are completely helpless. God takes away your strength. He takes away your mobility. He takes away anything but terror, anything but sheer terror. You don't even know where your family is during this darkness. This is a darkness that me and you have never felt. But they felt it back then for 3 straight days. I believe that this was the most harsh of all of them, besides the final one. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. So all the way up until this point, we've seen the water turn to blood, the frogs, the lice, the flies, sick cattle, boils, fire, hail, locusts, darkness, and death of the firstborn. This one is a special one. And it's the reason why it's set apart from the rest. This is the Passover night. This one is very significant, incredibly significant. We'll get into that in the next chapter. But notice how darkness is pretty much the final one before the big one. Of all the Egyptian gods, the one in which was probably the most worshipped was the sun god, Horus. And they even said that the pharaohs, whenever they became Pharaoh, whenever they were exalted, that they became Horus. And if you've ever seen the eye on the back of the dollar bill, of course everybody has, but if you've ever seen the eye on the back of the dollar bill, it's the eye of Horus. Because in Horus's fight against Set, the other false god of theirs, he lost his eye. It was later restored, and now it's called the all-seeing eye. Here's the hieroglyph of the eye of Horus. Here's Katy Perry with the eye of Horus. You also see the eye on the dollar bill right here. It's just an eye. Here's the world-famous model, Naomi Campbell, and right here's where she lives, shaped into the eye of Horus. It's on Cleopatra Island, I believe is what the island's called. Here was Kanye West back in the day, wearing the big Horus necklace. There's Katy Perry again with the all-seeing eye. There's Beyonce with the all-seeing eye on her shirt. There's world-famous basketball player LeBron James with the all-seeing eye on his shirt. But this eye is everywhere. Horus is worshipped in Hollywood. And it's even on album covers. Right here's Bob Dylan's album cover. Obviously, the eye of Horus right there. I have done exhaustive videos on this eye being in everything associated with Hollywood. So I think it's no coincidence that God put this horrifying darkness upon the land in which worship the sun god. No light for any of you in whom worship light. The sunlight, anyway. So where was Horus? Where was Osiris? Where was Set, the god of war? Why don't they bring out the god of war to fight against this god of the Israelites? Because he can do nothing, just like the rest of them can do nothing. So I do believe this was a bit of a judgment upon these false gods as well, them being demons. So you see this darkness, and then the darkness ends after 3 days. And Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, Go ye, serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be stayed, let your little ones also go with you. And Moses said, Thou must give us also sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord our God. You see, the Pharaoh is wanting to keep their cattle behind. Our cattle also shall go with us, there shall not a hoof be left behind, for thereof must we take to serve the Lord our God, and we know not with what we must serve the Lord until we come thither. He says, you have to give us all of our cattle, because we don't know how many we'll have to sacrifice once we get to where we're going. And I believe that there was one of two reasons why the Pharaoh was wanting to keep their cattle. First of all, to get them to come back. They wouldn't have any cattle, nothing to eat, nothing to bargain with. To just get them to come back, keep their possession. Number two, I believe, is also very likely. Maybe he was wanting to keep their cattle in order to take their cattle once that they left. Because you have to remember, this is an famished nation now. They're starving. They don't have any crops. They don't have any cattle. They don't have anything except for the few in which the cattle in which those Egyptians which feared the Lord saved for themselves. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And Pharaoh said unto him, Get thee from me. Take heed to thyself, see my face no more. For in that day thou seest my face, thou shalt die. One can just feel this anger coming off the pages, because you have to think, this Pharaoh has done been through the ringer, come back out, put through another ringer, come right back out, put through another ringer. This Pharaoh has had it. His nation is wiped out. People are now going to be starving to death and dying. All these things. And locusts, the biggest locust swarm in the entire world just came through. Now they had to deal with darkness and evil just pervading every single inch of their being. And he is just stressed to the max. It is said about world leaders that they age double the amount of a normal person. Like our American presidents, they can go in and they'll look 20 years older whenever they come out because of the stress that's on their mind all the time. Well, this Pharaoh probably felt like he had aged 50 years after just this few months or whatever, however long this was. But this Pharaoh he's had enough. He has just absolutely had enough. He doesn't even want to see Moses anymore. He just says, "Don't even look at me anymore. I'm so fed up with this." And Moses said, "Thou hast spoken well. I will see thy face again no more." And sadly, it does get even worse, which we'll pick up on that, hopefully, Lord willing, tomorrow. Until then, God of peace be with you all. Amen.